I didn't notice him at first. Most people wouldn't have. The photograph was old. The colors had faded slightly, and the edges had begun curling inward from years inside a cardboard box. It was just another picture from my childhood, the kind families keep without thinking much about it. A birthday party in my parents' backyard, paper decorations tied to the fence, a cake sitting carefully in the center of the table. My mother leaning toward me with a bright smile. My father standing proudly behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder. I must have looked at that photograph dozens of times over the years. But that night, something about it felt different. I leaned closer to the lamp on the kitchen table. And that was when I saw him, standing behind the fence. At first, I thought he was just a neighbor, someone walking past the yard when the photograph was taken. That happens in old pictures sometimes. People wander into the background without realizing they've become part of someone else's memory. But the longer I stared at the photograph, the more something about it began to feel wrong. He wasn't walking past. He wasn't talking to anyone. He wasn't smiling. He was simply standing there, watching. The strange part wasn't just that he was there. It was the way he stood, still, patient, almost as if he had always expected to be in the photograph. And the way he looked at the camera made my stomach tighten, because it didn't feel like he was looking at the photographer. It felt like he was looking through the photograph, at me. I turned the picture over. 1978. I would have been 6 years old, which meant something very simple. If that man had really been there that day, someone in my family would have remembered him. But I didn't. Still, I tried to ignore the feeling. Old photographs often contain strangers, neighbors, friends, people whose names disappear over time. So I placed the photograph aside and reached for another. But only a few minutes later, I froze again, because I had found him. This photograph had been taken many years later, my high school graduation. There I was, in a dark suit, standing between my parents outside the school building. Everyone was smiling. Everyone except him. Across the street, beneath a tree, stood the same man. Same thin face, same grey hair, same tired expression, and the same stillness. Watching. My chest tightened. 2 photographs, taken nearly 15 years apart, and the same stranger appearing in both. That couldn't be coincidence. I began flipping through the photographs more quickly. Another picture. A family vacation at the lake. My parents sitting together on the dock. My daughter standing beside me in the sand. And in the distance, near the trees. There he was again. Another photograph. Christmas morning. My daughter opening presents on the living room floor. And in the shadowed doorway behind the couch, the same man, watching. At first, the appearances were subtle, but the more photographs I examined, the more impossible it became to ignore. He appeared again and again. Family dinners, holiday gatherings, school events, vacations. Sometimes he stood far away, sometimes only half visible behind other people, sometimes barely noticeable near the edge of the frame, but always there, always watching. The strangest part wasn't just that he appeared repeatedly, it was that he never seemed to change. Years passed in the photographs, decades. My hair darkened, then slowly turned grey. My parents aged. My daughter grew from a child into a young woman. But the man in the background looked exactly the same every time. Same grey hair, same tired eyes, same calm posture, as if time had stopped for him. A cold thought slowly formed in my mind. What if this man had been following me my entire life? The idea sounded ridiculous, but once the thought appeared, I couldn't make it go away. Earlier that afternoon, my daughter had stood in the doorway of the kitchen, holding the cardboard box. She didn't place it on the table immediately. For a moment, she simply held it there, as if she was deciding whether she should give it to me at all. "Where did you find those?" I asked. "In the attic," she said. Her voice was calm, but something about her expression felt careful, like she was choosing her words one at a time. "I thought you might want to look through them." She finally placed the box on the kitchen table. Dust lifted slightly from the cardboard when it touched the wood. I brushed the dust away with my hand. "You kept all these?" I asked. She nodded. "You used to like looking at them." The way she said that made something tighten in my chest. Used to. Past tense. I opened the box and saw stacks of photographs inside. Years of them. Moments I recognized immediately. Others that felt strangely distant, as if they belonged to someone else's life. I looked up at her. "You said these might help me remember something." She hesitated. Then she asked the question that had confused me earlier. "Dad, how much do you remember from the last 20 years? I laughed a little when she asked it. The question seemed ridiculous. "What kind of question is that?" But she didn't laugh. She just watched me, her eyes studying my face carefully, the way someone watches a stranger. After a moment, she said quietly, "Just look through them." She turned toward the doorway, but before she left the kitchen, she stopped. Then she said something that hadn't meant anything to me at the time, but hours later, sitting alone with those photographs, the memory of her words suddenly felt heavier. "Sometimes," she said softly, "pictures remember things that we don't." That sentence stayed with me, echoing quietly in my mind as I continued looking through the photographs. Then I found one that made my hands tremble. A hospital room, my wife lying quietly in bed, her face pale, peaceful. I remembered that day, or at least I believed I did. But standing quietly near the far wall of the hospital room was the same man, watching. Something inside my chest began to tighten, because suddenly something about his face looked familiar. Not vaguely familiar, painfully familiar. I remember trying to convince myself there had to be another explanation. That the man in the photographs had to be someone else. Maybe a distant relative, maybe a neighbor, maybe someone who simply appeared in the background more often than I realized. So I began studying the photographs more carefully. Not the events, not the people, just him. I leaned closer to the lamp, examining the details of his face, the shape of his nose, the lines near his eyes, the way his shoulders leaned slightly forward. Then I picked up another photograph, one I hadn't noticed earlier. It was taken outside our old house. My daughter must have been 10 years old. She was standing in the driveway with her bicycle. I was kneeling beside her, helping adjust something on the handlebars. The sunlight was bright. The image was clear, clear enough to see everything, including the man standing across the street, watching. For a long moment I studied his face, trying to find something that proved he was someone else, something that separated him from me. But the longer I looked, the harder that became, because the shape of his face looked familiar. The way his shoulders slouched looked familiar. Even the way he stood looked familiar. A slow unease spread through my chest, and that was when I stood up and walked toward the mirror. For a long moment I stared at my reflection. The man staring back looked older than I remembered, the lines around his eyes deeper, the grey in his hair more obvious. For a moment, something about his face felt unfamiliar. Then I returned to the table. I picked up the photograph again. Back to the mirror. Back to the photograph. back to the mirror again, and slowly, the realization began forming in my mind. The stranger in the photographs wasn't following my life. He wasn't a ghost. He wasn't someone watching me. He was me, not the version of me I remembered, but the version of me that existed after my memories began disappearing. The reason he looked the same in every photograph was because my mind had frozen him there. The last version of myself I could still recognize. Everything that happened after that had become someone else, someone my mind could no longer identify, someone who looked like a stranger when I saw his face, which meant something terrifying. Every time I looked at those photographs, I wasn't seeing a stranger watching my life. I was seeing the person I had slowly turned into, while my memory erased the years between. And someday soon, I would forget the man standing in the mirror too. But the photographs would remember. They would always remember the stranger standing quietly behind every moment of my life, watching, waiting, patiently, for the day he finally stopped being a stranger and became the only version of me that remained.